Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Thursday, June 18th, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. Today we talk about Mizzou, the SEC, and college sports with Tigers beat writer Souichi Terada. It's been kind of a busy week in Missouri sports with athletes back on campus. Athletic Director Jim Sterk speaking to college sports issues at a forum sponsored by the Kansas City Public Library. Eli Drinkwitz and other football coaches holding Zoom conferences with media, and former coach Gary Pinkel appearing on the ballot for the College Football Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. We cover all of that with Souichi. We'll also play a portion of the forum involving Jim Sterk and Kansas Athletic Director Jeff Long, which was moderated by former USA Today college sports writer Steve Weberg. All right, so let's get going. Hey, Souichi, how you doing?
Not too bad, Blair. I keep coming back to the weather, but it's getting hot.
You're right. You're a Michigan guy, Detroit, and so you know about cold weather. You probably don't know about the heat that we're experiencing now, in such a way. And I always tell people who aren't from this part of the country that we do. We have weather in the extremes. We have incredible cold, incredible hot, incredible wind. When it rains, it floods. When it snows, it blizzards. That sort of thing. And speaking of blizzards, I was struck by a story that appeared in this morning's Kansas City Star that's online at kansascity.com, and we will obviously post a link to it in the show notes, that you wrote involving an assistant coach, new assistant coach, like most of the assistant coaches at Missouri. Football coaches are new, but Casey Woods, the tight ends coach, was on his way. This was back in January, right? Making his way from Columbia to Kansas City to visit a tight end who had committed to the signed with the Tigers, but was in the hospital in Blue Springs. And Casey had quite an adventure. Why don't you pick it up from there?
That's a great segue from weather to Casey Woods' KC story. This story just kind of fell into the media's lap yesterday. I think it was right at the end of Drinkwitz. So the way Mizzou does it, Drinkwitz was speaking for about 30-35 minutes on the Zoom call, and then Casey Woods popped in because he was next on the schedule, I guess. And then Drinkwitz was asked about Casey Woods, and then Casey kind of or he dropped this kind of just a side, quick one-sentence thing about an accident in the blizzard, something about Daniel Parker Jr., who was in the hospital because he had an eye infection. And so Casey Woods, we asked him about it, and then Casey Woods kind of went on this long story about how he was driving down on I-70, then he got into an accident with an 18-wheeler, which obviously he's fine. It wasn't too bad. He said he had a little bit of whiplash. But then he was in Odessa, a few miles out of Odessa, and then had to find his way from Odessa to Blue Springs, where eventually he was picked up. And it's this whole ordeal, very scary one, just because you never know what could happen in a blizzard-like conditions. But too kind of surreal just to hear what this guy is going through a few weeks after getting into Missouri from Alabama, of all places, where you're not going to get any snow. And there's a lot of twists and turns. I highly recommend reading the story just because I don't think I can do it justice. I think the funny thing too is that there are a lot of these moments that you were like, that's kind of a weird thing. Like one of the details that kind of struck me was one of his old Tennessee college roommates lives in the KC area. He was a former third-round pick of the Chiefs. Brad Cottom. I think that's how you say it. Yep. There's just all these little details where you're like, that's kind of cool, and that's what happened. Okay, now. So I highly recommend giving it a read. Casey he talked about it with kind of this jovial, happy tone, I guess. But I think he kind of realized how fortunate he was.
Yeah, I mean, a few months later, he can look back on that moment and laugh a little bit about it and share the story. But the detail that stood out to me reading your story was, when he stopped, he braked his rental car, applied the brakes, stopped, and then he looked in his rearview mirror and couldn't see anything because basically it was whiteout at that time. And the next thing you know, there's an 18-wheeler behind him, and that and look, anybody who has driven in snow or a blizzard knows the feeling, and it's a really frightening one. Thankfully, everybody was okay, and all's well that ends well. He ended up going to see Parker, I guess, in the hospital and fulfilling the mission that he started out with. So again, highly recommend you read the story, and we've linked to it here in the show notes. Hey, so it's been a week of interviews for Missouri, and like as you said, Eli Drinkwitz was on a Zoom call. We're still doing Zoom calls, right? On Wednesday, and the day before, on Tuesday this week, Jim Sterk, the athletic director, joined KU's athletic director Jeff Long in a forum at the Kansas City Public Library, where the topics ranged from campus responses to Black Lives Matter protests, to the world in the sports world in the COVID-19 era, and of course the resumption of the border war rivalry between Missouri and Kansas. I was wondering, I know you were you were paying attention to the call that night, and I was too. I thought they were both really good and informative, both Jeff Long and Jim Sterk. But I'm wondering if you heard anything from the athletic directors that stood out to you, maybe in the way of returning to sports in the COVID pandemic world, and the cautious steps that are going to be taken by teams, and we'll just zoom in on Missouri here. The importance of playing football, of restarting it on time, maybe without 100% attendance, or the ability to have 100% attendance. What did Jim Sterk say that may have been informative or made an impression?
Yeah, admittedly, so we actually got Sterk last week. So in terms of just newsy items, there wasn't anything particularly new in that regard. But yeah, I think it was pretty cool that we were able to see, one is KU, MU, but we were able to kind of hear from two athletic directors from two different conferences. And I think that's a kind of an important distinction, just because they spoke about it on it too. It's just that there's no uniformity in college football. I mean, you have 10 commissioners, you have 10 leagues for Division I FBS, and then all the other independent ones, including Notre Dame and all that. But like the SEC has kind of been doing its own thing. I know the Big 12, I believe, voluntary workout started this Monday, whereas SEC started last Monday, and then the NCAA approved it 2 Mondays ago. So it is kind of all over the board, and then you see kind of the Big 10 doing its own thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of just, we don't know what it's going to look like. I think when it comes to testing, how many people are allowed inside the stadium, like the SEC, if the SEC has 75% of its capacity, and to the Big 12 only allows 50%, what does that mean? And then you have all these hypotheticals that's still a little too early for. But I thought that was really interesting. I did enjoy the questions. The moderator kind of pushed them a little bit. I remember getting a text from another Mizzou beat writer, and he was like, "These questions are pretty good." And I'm like, "Yeah, that 30 years of reporting experience was coming in handy." So, it did seem like the athletic directors actually kind of shined some light on some stuff. And then some of the things that struck me about Sterk was just the football capacity. And I wrote about this too, Blair, about earlier this week, just about, we talk a lot about SEC football and the TV broadcast rights and the media deals, and that is where the moneymaker is. That's where you're going to hear about the millions of dollars being dispersed in the SEC and between the 14 member schools. But ticket sales, that's a lot of money. I mean, I looked at the fiscal year 2018 or 2019 fiscal year, excuse me, that includes a 2018 football season. Nearly a quarter of Mizzou's football revenue came directly from ticket sales alone. I think it was like 24.88% or something like that. So that's a pretty significant chunk of change. I think if you were going 50% capacity, that'll probably go half, and then who knows what'll happen in terms of concession deals. And for Mizzou, you really have to realize this is kind of a blow in the sense of they opened their South End Zone facility last year, and going forward, that was a big ticket kind of, hey fans, look at this new thing that you might not have been able to see before. Let's bring in more money this way, and then I'm sure they'll kind of prioritize that. But that's just another thing when you stack it on top of Drinkwitz being a first-year coach, and then you got this South End Zone facility. You're trying to make up money with the NCAA ban from last year. That's going to affect this year's fiscal cycle. There's a lot of different moving parts for Mizzou that you kind of look at it as a whole and you're like, oh man, that's just another thing James Sterk has to deal with. And I think he's feeling the pressure a little bit, which he spoke about briefly on the call with Jeff Long.
For sure. And you're right. The moderator, Steve Weberg, who spent 30 years as a college sports writer for USA Today, and you'll hear a portion of the forum on after we take a break. But we were hearing the athletic directors try to come up with answers to issues that look, fans want to know, media wants to know answers to, and they just don't have answers right now. Not all the answers. I think they gave what they could or expressed what they could, but there's just no way of knowing. They have to work within state and local government guidelines, the CDC guidelines when it comes to restarting the season. I think it's been smart for athletic directors and those in professional sports to be optimistic, and especially when they see what's going on around the world. I guess the English Premier League soccer started up this week. We've already had, German soccer, Korean baseball, New Zealand rugby. It's happening all over the world, and the U.S. is waiting for that. And of course, baseball would be next if baseball gets its act together with the players and the players union and the commissioner. But then football is the one we're all waiting for, and that would be first week in September for college football, a week later for the NFL, and that's the sport we're all waiting for. They have had the luxury of timing here and not having to cancel or postpone games. I mean, they had to do things with off-season activities, but now kind of they're getting to the point where decisions have to be made about these things. Or at least they're approaching that point, and they're finding that it's just not easy. It's absolutely not easy for ADs, people who are in positions of authority and people who speak. And it's there are some tough decisions out there for them in the interest of safety and health. So, hey, and Souichi. So we also heard from Drinkwitz, as we said, new head football coach. I like the way you put it in your story. I mean, here's a guy who with his first year coach at Mizzou with a new crop of assistants, obviously getting to know his players, and what a year to have to do that, right? It just seems like a bizarre time to be a first year head coach at a program, and under NCAA rules, he can't directly deal with his players, or he has a very limited view of his players in this time because of he can watch is it 8 hours of taped practice, or explain what access Eli Drinkwitz has to his players.
Yeah, so when you hear voluntary workouts started last Monday, June 8th for Mizzou, that means they are able to go into the facilities, but the players are mainly only working with the strength and conditioning coaches, which is an important distinction, right, Blair? Just because you went through spring football practices, which were 3 of them, and you got hands-on coaching, football coaching then, but now this is just lifting weights, getting in shape, doing workouts. That's all the players are able to do right now with the coaches. So the 8 hours that you mentioned is actually remote training work. So that's mostly been Zoom calls and everything like that. I believe, I want to say, the months kind of blurred together now, but I believe it started at 2 hours per week. Then they bumped it up to 4, and now we're up at 8. And they usually split that up with, positional groups. Then they'll have big team meetings. So it doesn't go, obviously they don't go all 8 hours at once, but usually it's like 2 on a Wednesday, maybe 2 on a Thursday, and then kind of divvy it up throughout the week. But that's all the football coaches are allowed to get now. Soon, it's sounding like the Division I Football Oversight Committee, I believe, finalized on Wednesday a new plan in terms of the practice plans. And I can't get into the details off the top of my head, the nitty-gritty stuff, but essentially it would be around a 2-week ramp-up period in mid-July. And then you're going to get get into like a full speed kind of a training camp in early August ahead of that early September start. So we're looking at a couple dates here in the next few days, few weeks where it's going to be, kind of make it or break it, I guess, for college football, just because if this proposal gets passed, and I believe it has, and it still has to get approved and all that things, then you're looking at a ramp up period where you're like, okay, we're going to have college football, but who knows what's going to happen? We've already seen schools shut down voluntary workouts like Houston, so
Right.
I think that's kind of a difficult thing for the coaches, just because. And Drinkwitz mentioned this on Wednesday's Zoom call. Like, he has contingency plans, but there's just so many ways this thing can go right or wrong that it's impossible to just have all of those plans just in set. So it's kind of it's such an awkward, unenviable position.
Yeah.
Drink with us in, just because you don't know what's going to happen next week or 2 weeks from now or mid-July. Sterk mentioned is kind of the point where don't know if they'll have a season or not, and then we're still kind of a month out of that, essentially. July 15th, I believe he said. So here we are, kind of twiddling our thumbs, just like Drinkwitz is.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, even coaches also are in a tough spot as well. Okay, and speaking of coaches, let's wind down our chat with another piece of news that emerged this week with the announcement from the National Football Foundation. The College Football Hall of Fame ballot was out, and Gary Pinkel appeared in his first year of eligibility, appeared on the ballot. So, along with, I believe, he was one of 7 coaches from the FBS ranks to appear on the ballot. There are additional, maybe dozen to 15 more coaches that are on the ballot. Those are from the other classifications, everything below the football bowl subdivision. So Division 2, 3, NAIA, that sort of thing. And the class typically it takes 2 or 3 coaches every year into the Hall of Fame class. This ballot also includes Bob Stoops, the longtime Oklahoma coach, and I think Bob Stoops is a slam dunk first ballot guy. But I think Gary Pinkel is a very, very strong candidate. And I know you didn't cover Pinkel's years at Mizzou, Souichi, but you've been in Columbia now for several months, and I'm wondering if you have a thought on Gary Pinkel and that stretch of Missouri football from 2001 through 2015, his last year. You saw it from a distance, and not all of it because you were just a kid back in some of that. But I'm wondering what your sort of impressions of Mizzou football under Gary Pinkel were from a distance.
Yeah, I mean, when Gary Pinkel retired after the 2015 season, I want to say I was a freshman in college. So, admittedly, I was not too in tune during the early Gary Pinkel years. But I think it's hard to deny Mizzou's success then. I mean, you're talking 07. I wasn't a huge sports fan back then, but even I knew Mizzou, KU, that was the thing to watch that year. And then you look at some of the first few years in the SEC in 2013 and 14. I had no connections to Mizzou at the time, and I was like, whoa, Mizzou. Dang, I did not expect them to be so successful.
Division champions, yeah. Two in the SEC and 2 in the Big 12 for Pinkel.
Yeah, especially early in the SEC year. So that was kind of an eye-opener. I hate to do this just because it's not our coverage area, but when I was talking to a few of my Mizzou friends, my Mizzou sports journalism friends, which there are many of, the way they kind of explained it to me was Gary Pinkel is essentially Mizzou's Mark D'Antonio, because I went to Michigan State and Mark D'Antonio is the winningest coach there. He brought them to heights that Michigan State hadn't seen in decades, much like Gary Pinkel did. So, I mean, you and then obviously D'Antonio isn't the winningest coach at 2 different schools, like Gary Pinkel is at Toledo and Mizzou, but that comparison always seemed kind of appropriate to me, just because you've got these, legendary coaches at their institutions. They were there for so long. They set this kind of, they showed the schools could win at a high level, and that can be part of like the fan expectations. And I think that they kind of set that foundation. And it's interesting what Mizzou fans now expect out of this program the past few years, just because, I mean, the kind of the impression I got with Barry Odom getting fired was that, hey, Gary Pinkel could do this at Mizzou. We should expect this at Mizzou, and that's our that's our baseline level of, hey, this is us moving forward. So I think he did a lot of good in that regard.
I think it's a good observation that maybe in another period in Mizzou football history, Barry Odom, with the record that he finished with, or that he had after 3 years, would have been good enough to continue. But you're right, because of the standard that Gary Pinkel established, going to bowl games or having bowl seasons in, I think it was 11 of his 15 years, winning 4 division titles, double-digit victory seasons, always seeming to have an NFL level quarterback that it just wasn't, Barry Odom's performance wasn't good enough, and so that's why Eli Drinkwitz is the new head coach at Missouri. So, all right, Souichi. So we're going to hear from Jim Sterk and Jeff Long, the Kansas athletic director, and Steve Weberg, as we've mentioned, gave him a plug earlier, the former longtime college sports writer at USA Today, who was the moderator of the forum at the Kansas City Public Library. We're going to do that after a break, and we're going to say goodbye to Souichi Terada, who covers the Tigers for the Kansas City Star. So, Souichi, appreciate the conversation, man, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks, Blair.
Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
We are gearing sports back up, and we're hearing a lot now about why that's happening, about the kind of restorative mental health qualities that has, and it's an important signal that other elements of society can come back. And right now, college football is scheduled to kick off with 7 games August 29th. Then it goes full throttle by Labor Day weekend. Saturday, September 5th, Mizzou opens at home. Central Arkansas are scheduled to. Kansas versus at home against New Hampshire. There seems to be a universal optimism that we're going to see at least the start of a college season. Is the season indeed on unless there's some significant COVID surge between now and then that stops it? Are we operating under the assumption that it's a full go?
I would say you said it right. I think unless there's something from the pandemic and the Center for Disease Control puts a stop to it, where there's a complete change of what the momentum is going now, where the momentum is going now, I think we do have a season. And you think about it, 2 months ago, if you had 3 positive tests, well, basically we shut down the men's basketball tournament, in March, and now we're kind of, everyone is kind of working through those things and have a lot more knowledge, have precautions, if you will, of what needs to be done, and by 2 months from now, 3 months from now, we're going to know a lot more, and hopefully it'll be in a positive way, and we'll be able to continue to move forward.
Yeah, Steve, I would say that I'm positive. I think each day that goes by, I think we as college administrators, coaches, and student athletes feel more positive. But I think, candidly, we really don't know as we begin to, come back, socialize. When we move from weightlifting, which is done in groups of 10, 6 feet apart. And when we come back to blocking and tackling and hitting, and I'm not sure we really do know what's going to happen. Now, we have our medical professionals. Both of us have our medical professionals in place, and they'll be guiding us every step of the way. But we are hopeful. We're planning, and I'm sure like Jim, we're planning on for 100% occupancy of our football stadium, but we're also planning for as little as 20%. And we're getting pressured now for answers. What's it going to be? Well, the answer is we don't know, and we won't know till we're closer to that September 5th starting date to know what our stadiums are going to look like as far as entry into it and fans. And we don't know what the impact of practicing close quarters, hitting, tackling, all those things will have on a team. And, so I think things are positive, but they're far from certain that we will get this season started on September 5th. And I think it's more likely that some teams will start and some teams won't, and we'll see people during the season have to miss a game. And so I think all of those scenarios have been played out, at all of our conferences. I know the A5 conferences are talking almost daily. And then so a lot is unknown, but I would say that it's positive at this point. We're moving in a positive direction.
So, the pro sports, they have a commissioner who says we are starting the season here with this. College sports don't have that. That's one of the complications. Is there supposed to be, or will there be an official pronouncement? Yes, there's a season. It's starting August 29th. And who makes that decision? Is that consultation among the 10 major conference commissioners in the case of the bowl subdivision, the NCAA bowl subdivision?
Well, I thought that it's the former chair of the bowl selection committee. I thought that he had that right.
Well, I think he's accepting all controversy, all complaints about selections from here into the future, but I'm not sure about declaring the start to the season.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, we'll give them your email and cell phone at the end of this program.
Well, as long as you don't send it to TCU or Baylor, I'm okay.
But anyway, back to the question: who makes the call, and is there an official call that's made? Yes, we start August 29th.
You want to start, Jeff?
Well, yeah, I'll say it this way, and Jim can certainly add to it, and I'm sure he will. But, Steve, really, to answer your question, there is not one entity that will decide. Now, as we look at that, there's so many layers. We're getting information and rules from the NCAA, and we also get it from our own conference. And then we have the group of A5 commissioners that will be meeting. And then we have the whole 10 commissioners that also will be meeting. And then it comes down to states. In our state of Kansas, it would have rested with the governor. She has, since early on, taking control and doing a fine job. She has now rested that authority in the county, so the county medical officers. So they'll make decisions that come down to the university, that come down to, in Kansas's case, what we call Kansas Team Health, which is a medical partnership between the University of Kansas Health Systems and the Lawrence Memorial Hospital System. And those doctors will make decisions on down to the athletic director to make final decisions. So that's why I say state by state, you'll see some institutions being able to play, and their opponent is in a good place, and they can play, and they can play that contest on Saturday. But in other states, they're going to have a situation where the county health or the state or the governor, says they can't play that game. So I do think it's going to be a varied season. I know there are conferences and scenarios being discussed where, some conferences, because teams can't play, may play an opponent twice in their conference. So there's a lot of scenarios out there being explored. And again, at the end of the day, on June 16th, we don't know, but we're certainly planning and spending a lot of time, effort, and energy planning for the unknown.
Yeah, as Steve, Jeff said it, explained it very well. There's 8 layers of approval, basically, that will go through, and just like the Big 12, but the SEC has a medical task force, and they have a great group of folks that are help guiding us back towards repopulation of our student athletes, and then they're looking at contests in the future and how we might be able to do that and how it might work. But yeah, the biggest thing will be adjust and pivot, and we'll probably be doing that a lot this season.
So on the surface, it seems more understandable that the pros are returning. If there's going to be sports, that it's pro sports. I mean, they're pros. They're salaried. The players are salaried. And the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball, if owners and players can ever work out an agreement, which isn't certain at this point, they can maintain uniformity in practice regimens and scheduling and pretty much every other area, avoid the messiness that you just alluded to. But, and this is part of that messiness, college athletics is aligned with higher education. And getting football and other sports back up and running and doing it safely would seem to be secondary to getting the academic enterprise back on its feet. And beyond that, the athletes aren't salaried. They're not unionized like the pros. They don't have the same say in mapping out the terms of returning to practice and ultimately returning to play. As you just alluded to, you can't dictate the consistency from school to school or conference to conference, including even whether every school will field a team, as Jeff said. Scheduling will be uneven. There seems to be wide concern, again, as you all have pointed out, that after starting, season could be interrupted or halted by a second virus spike. So with all of these complications that pro sports have and so much still not known about COVID-19, why not take a year off? Why not let things settle down, hopefully get a vaccine, and reboot this time next year?
Well, let me start, and then Jeff will certainly be a lot more articulate on it. But for us at Mizzou, we started to repopulate our student athletes as our vet med students were coming back. So the doctor that was overseeing the repopulation of the campus was giving us advice, was giving the academic side advice as well. And so it's not, I think there'll be sports as long as the campuses are open, and for us it'll probably be a blended type of return, but we're planning on having the students back. And so if the students are here, and we had a group come last week, they're very excited to be here, and they feel they're a heck of a lot safer than where they are when they're home. So they feel like they have the medical attention, they have the physical attention, they have the coaching attention here, and so they were excited to be back. And so we're part of the academic enterprise, just like you said. We're not different, and so I think that those student athletes want to be here.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Tip of the cap to Souichi Terada for stopping by to talk all things Mizzou sports. Links to stories that he's written about Missouri can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, earlier in the episode, you heard me talk about the Sports Pass offer. It still stands, and it's a good one. $30 for a year's worth of sports coverage, and that includes the Sports Extra with the e-edition. There's more than 20 additional pages of national sports coverage today. Well, here's an even better offer. Buy the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports, news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus additional news, sports, and business coverage. The details can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That is account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back Friday with another episode.